Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalam ala Sayyid al-Anbiya wal Mursaleen. Allahumma alimna ma yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima tu'allimuna wa zidna bi fadlika 'ilman wa ta'liman innaka ala kulli shay'in qadir. So as fasting is the third pillar of Islam. It is the well-known abstinence to not do something, to abstain from something, but with certain special characteristics. So in general, we have to understand that every single act of worship, or particularly the five pillars, it's either a push or a pull, or both. So you're either pushing yourself towards Allah or pulling yourself away from other than Allah, or doing both. So in prayer, to some extent, you're pushing yourself away from other than Allah in that you are giving up time and effort. But the main thing in prayer is that you're pushing yourself to Allah by talking to Allah, by praying to Allah, by praising Allah, by expressing your worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's a push towards Allah. Zakat and fasting are pushing away from other than Allah because you're giving up on the dunya. You're giving up on other things. So it's kind of like you're making a vacuum, if that makes sense. You're making a vacuum in your heart which allows space for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Small space. Can you turn away from the dunya a little bit so to put some space for Allah to come in, right? So zakat does that, fasting does that. Hajj does both because you are pushing towards Allah by going somewhere and saying words and doing actions and expressing your worship for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But also you're going away. So it's both at the same time. Right? The Shahada is both at the same time because you're kind of embarrassing yourself. You're actually breaking your own, like it's an embarrassment to yourself to acknowledge the truth. It breaks the nafs. You're shaking off social things. I publicly accept this. And then you're also saying something so it's both. So Shahada and Hajj do both. Dhikr just does one, right? Well, I mean, you give up time, right? But otherwise, your dhikr of Allah is turning to Allah, pulling you close to Allah, right? Doing without in the world, keeping a life simple and not buying lots of things, not talking very much, right? Is pulling away from the dunya. So you don't talk so much, you don't buy so much, you don't eat so much. Taqallul, general not doing without and not having so many things. This is turning away from Allah, turning away from other than Allah. Okay, so fasting is the third pillar of Islam. It's a well-known abstinence with certain special characteristics. Among them are making a niyyah, you intend every day, or during the night before. So before Fajr comes in, you intend to fast that day. Abandoning all things which break the fast, including food, drink, sexual intercourse, masturbation, and self-induced vomiting. Right. So to intentionally, knowing fully and intentionally and without coercion, eat. To not eat. That's what it means. Knowingly and intentionally and without coercion, not drink. To knowingly and intentionally and without coercion, avoid any of these things. Right. So if somebody was forced to drink, or they forgot that they were fasting, or they accidentally ate some food, or they were raped, may Allah protect us all, right? Or they had a wet dream, or they unintentionally vomited, none of these things would break their fast. Among the things which perfect the fast is refraining from the limbs, refraining of the limbs from things that Allah dislikes. Right, we can talk about that later on. Right. The 7 limbs quote, which need to be restrained, will be discussed later. It has been said in a hadith that 5 things nullify the act of fasting: lies, backbiting, slander, false oaths, and looking with desire. And I believe this hadith is weak. Allahu a'lam. But anyway, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned it in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim that whoever doesn't leave off qawl az-zur wal amal bihi, lying words and lying deeds, Allah doesn't need him to fast, right? So in general, we can break down the fast and probably the prayer as well into kind of four levels, right? There's kind of four levels of fasting. The basic technical fast that technically you have actually fasted, i.e., you don't have to repeat this fast, which is you didn't eat, you didn't drink, etc. Okay, but you don't necessarily get the reward because there's more to it. On top of that is you fasted from eating, drinking, and etc., along with fasting from physical sins. You didn't say anything haram, you didn't do anything haram while you're fasting. So if you say anything haram while fasting, or you do anything haram while fasting, you break the reward of the fast. Right? So this is it's a real you know training zone, intense training zone, right? Where you turn your heart away from other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then you refine what you do. So that's the higher level. The higher level than that is that you don't eat and don't drink. You don't sin with your body and you don't sin with your heart. So you don't look at other people with disdain. You don't show off. You don't you don't feel pride. You don't feel these kind of things, right? You're watching your heart and protecting your heart. Ghibat al-qalb, speaking bad about other people. You have grudges against other people. So you speak bad about other people. So none of this happens. From Fajr to Maghrib, you avoid all of that. A thought comes to your mind, you push it away. Thought comes to mind, you push it away. And every single time that happens, you get the ajr, right? So this is a real, so now you've got your technical fast plus physical, avoiding physical sins plus spiritual sins. And then the level above that is your fasting and ghayrillah, to fast from other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? To feel la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, from everything is happening because of Allah. I am just a puppet in this world. Everything else is just a puppet in this world. Everything is happening kun fayakun, being it is. I have one goal in life, one focus in life, one motive in life, one desire in life, which is pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is your state from Fajr to Maghrib, and that is Sawm Khawas al Khawas, right? The fast of the special of the special, the elite of the elite, right? And so that's what we aim towards. Obviously, that's quite difficult to achieve, but at least you come down to like the battleground should be somewhere between 2 and 3, not between 1 and 2. Because 1 and 2, that means you're in and out of like, so so genuine, like a practical thing. You got into an argument and you insulted somebody while you're fasting. Repeat that fast. Are you obliged to repeat that fast? No. But you didn't get reward, that there's no reward for that fast, right? Unless you were, you know, I mean, unless there's some kind of legitimate reason to insult them, but usually there isn't, right? You got angry, had an argument, you did something haram with your body, woman walking across the street and you looked a second time, right? You note it down, repeat that fast after Ramadan because, right? I mean, you don't technically have to do that. I mean, you have fasted Ramadan, but you broke the fast basically. So, so now that here's this thing that people will do in Ramadan, you realize, hang on a minute, it's actually really, really hard to do a proper fast, right? Because it's so hard to avoid riba, it's so hard to avoid looking twice, it's so hard to avoid all these different things. And then you realize, yeah, and are those things halal outside of Ramadan? Say no. Okay, then like, what are you doing in your life? Right? كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. Right? You have been, fasting has been prescribed for you as it has for those before you, so that you might learn how to have taqwa. Suddenly realize, oh my God, when Ramadan, I had to put screen block, I had to put like I had to kind of put a, what's it called? Image block on my computer. Otherwise, I kept breaking my fast. I say, yeah, well, that means you kept doing the haram the whole time before Ramadan. Oh my God, when I was hanging out with so-and-so, I kept making riba or saying bad words. So, yeah, well, then why are you hanging out with these people anyway? Right? Before Ramadan, I noticed that whenever I got tired and hungry, I got into an argument. So yeah, that happens basically every day, right? That's who you are. Go and ask your spouse, go and ask the people you live with. They say, oh yeah, be careful. There are certain times in your life where the test is more, so be very careful. In those situations, manage your emotions. Don't fall into the haram. right? Got to be careful. Can't just say you're not just a victim of the circumstances, right? So it's a huge, Ramadan is a huge opening for that. Among the things which perfect the fast are hastening to break the fast on the halal, right? Food as soon as the time has ended. So making sure that the food is halal. If you go to the masjid, make sure you understand how the masjid works. Do they stipulate halal? And when they say halal, do they actually mean halal, or is it just funky halal? Right? To break the fast as soon as it has ended, to not eat a great meal. Right. So again, what we're learning when you're breaking the fast, what you're learning while you're fasting is to turn away from the dunya. So now you have to turn away from the dunya inwardly while turning to the dunya outwardly. So when you break your fast, you don't turn back to the dunya inwardly. So what is the sign of that? The sign is that you want to do things in the sunnah way. The sign that you want to do things that you're attached to things in a otherworldly way, in an akhirah way, that you're attached to things as a means as opposed to an end, is that you'd use them in the right way. So now you're breaking your fast, right? Other people eat a lot, you don't eat a lot. Other people eat very quickly, you don't eat very quickly. Other people eat with the left hand, you eat with your right hand. Other people don't say Bismillah, you say Bismillah, right? Other people are with the food, you're with Allah. It's different. You're eating for the sake of Allah. And now that's the most Mubarak meal you ever ate because you don't want the food, right? So whenever you have the dunya, but you don't care about the dunya, there's barakah in the dunya. Whenever you have the dunya and you want the dunya, and you're very scared that you might lose it, there's no barakah in that. You're holding your baby, and I said, Habibi, would you love your baby to die as a shaheed right now? So yes. Can I take your baby right now and let him die as a shaheed? You say, no, 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 no. So it's called dunya. That's called dunya, right? Right. So whenever you have anything in your life, family, money, health, right? Safety, would you prefer to be in a very dangerous situation and be beloved to Allah? Or would you prefer to be in a safe situation and be hated by Allah? Say, no, I prefer to be in a safe situation. Right? That's called hubb dunya. Right? So to understand many people, the way they view dunya is they think dunya is extreme excess, like, love of power, wanting to take over the whole world, that's called dunya. Wanting to have ridiculous amount of cars, that's called dunya, right? That's not true. Dunya is when you see things as a goal in and of themselves. Making money is a goal in and of itself. Looks are a goal in and of itself. Pleasure is a goal in and of itself. Family is a goal in and of itself. Safety is a goal in and of itself. Security, work security is a goal in and of itself. That's not a goal. All these things, safety is amal, deeds that we do. We work towards living in a safe environment. We work towards having a steady income. We work towards having a family that work good dynamic. We work towards being healthy, safe, all these things. But that's amal. That's a deed that you're doing. But you're not seeking it in and of itself. Wudu is not sought in and of itself. Prayer is not sought in and of itself. Money is not sought in and of itself. So now you're eating this food, you broke your fast, and if there was no food, you wouldn't care. Or if somebody took it away from you, you wouldn't care because you're not eating it for itself. You're eating it as ibadah. So therefore, you're only going to eat to the extent to remove shiddat al-ju', to remove the acuteness of hunger, because you want to pray. The first thing you want to do is pray, right? So you're not there eating because you want to eat. You're there eating because you want to, because you just want to do what Allah wants you to do. Similarly, later in the evening, you might be with your spouse. You're not going to be intimate because of being intimate, but rather because Allah wants you to do that. It's a totally different relationship. Right? Totally different relationship. So what a difference between somebody who is intimate occasionally and they do that because they want to be intimate in and of themselves. That's a goal. As opposed to somebody who is intimate with their spouse regularly, multiple times, but they're only doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you look at one person like, well, this guy's crazy. It's like, well, this woman's crazy. It's like, what's the problem? It's like, that's actually ibadah, actually. There's two different things. So having the dunya does not imply wanting the dunya, right? And there's barakah. When you have the dunya and you don't want the dunya, there's barakah in it. And if you have the dunya or don't have the dunya, and you want the dunya, if you want the dunya, whether you have it or you don't, there's no barakah in it. So those people are dying to be on TV. I wish I was a film star. I wish I had power. I wish I had this. I wish I had kids. I wish I could get married. I wish I had stability in my life. I wish this, they have these things. I want these things in and of themselves. Whether they have them or they don't, there's no barakah in them anyway. They're blocked. Right? The way you can block yourself from the khair of the dunya is to want it. And the way you can benefit from the dunya is to not care about it and turn away from it and turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is what we're learning in Ramadan. That's what we're learning in Ramadan. And it's the test then is when you're breaking your fast. That's the test. Okay, and to not eat a grain. It is good to fast often, especially on the days that Islam has considered special. Um, Okay, so and God knows the best, and success is from Him. This says zakat. Zakat is a fourth pillar of Islam, and therefore every Muslim must know the type of possessions upon which it is a compulsory. They are livestock, so you pay zakat on livestock themselves, gold and silver, and their monetary equivalents. So if you have gold and silver, unless it is jewelry, permissible jewelry, you don't pay zakat in the Shafi school on permissible jewelry. So if a woman has a room full of bracelets and rings and necklaces, there's no zakat on that, right? As long as it's all usable as jewelry, there's no zakat on that. Trade goods themselves, so things you have invested in with the sole intention to sell. So you bought the house to live in, but you may sell it one day. No, that's not called tijara, right? Even if it's gold, yeah. Gold and silver, there's no zakat. So she has a gold bracelet, she has a gold, whatever necklace, whatever, gold rings. You have gold bullion, right? A chunk of gold, right? And you pay zakat on that. Or a man, for example, he has a gold ring. He's gonna have to pay zakat on that because it's not halal for a man to have gold ring, right? Okay, trade goods, so things you have invested in to sell, right? Buried treasure. So you suddenly found buried treasure on your land, for example. Gold and silver mines, you actually extract gold and silver from the ground. The mu'asharat, which are seed crops and fruit and certain fruits. So these are main staple foods like wheat, like barley, like rice. So the zakat on rice, for example, when you harvest the rice, is you give 5 to 10% depending on whether or not you irrigate it. Right? With wheat, it's 5 to 10% of the grain itself. Whereas money, it's how much you've saved for the whole year. It's different. But with uh, with crops and something else. Where do retirement accounts fall? Inshallah, we'll talk about that in the group, inshallah. It's a bit more complex. So anyway, so if you're a farmer and you have a large, you have crops, you're going to give 1/10, 1/20th to 1/10 of the crops each time you harvest the poor, which are seed crops and fruits here specifically meaning dates and grapes, no other fruits. So if you have an apple orchard, you do not give apples to people. If you have apricots, you don't give that out. It's just grapes and dates specifically. So the zakat that we paid on an apple orchard would be paid through savings. You harvest the apples, you sell them, you get the equivalent of gold and silver, dollars. You save that for a year, and then you will pay zakat on that. But if you didn't save it for a year, then no zakat will be due. Right? So similarly, when we say livestock, we mean cattle, meaning goats and sheep as one category, cows as one category, and camels as another category. So there's no zakat on chickens, no zakat on ducks, there's no zakat on I don't know. So you own 1 million chickens, you're a chicken farmer, right? So if you own 1 million chickens, how do you pay zakat? You pay zakat by selling chickens, by making profit, and by keeping that profit for a year. That's how you that's how you pay zakat, right? Otherwise, there's no zakat. Right? There's no zakat on animals other than free grazing livestock. And then when we say you pay zakat on cows, you have 100 cows, what do you do with them? Well, they graze for half the year and I buy feed for them for half the year. Okay, no zakat is due because they're not free grazing, right? A precondition of the zakat becoming obligatory is the passing of a lunar year. So if you have money at the beginning of the year, you have $10,000. At the end of the year, you have $15,000. And in the middle of the year, you had $500. You don't pay zakat because your money went below the zakat minimum, which is about $700, right? Which is also a condition for money and trade goods. Another condition is that they reach the nisab, the lower limit above which zakat is due. So here it says here, 592.9 grams of silver, right? So if you look at that, for example, who here is in Mizan is in England, right? So Mizan's in England. You're in right. So cost 592. Oops, 592.5, right? Grams of silver in GB in UK. About 1,200 pounds. So we're talking about the zakat minimum is something like $1,300, $1,400, something like that. Okay. So you had at one point you had $500, right? So money comes in, money goes. You did not save it. So in the Shafi school, we're looking at the minimum that you had for the whole year. What is the minimum that you've had for the whole year? Right. So at one point you went below the minimum. As soon as you go below the minimum, the zakat clock starts again. Okay. And so many people do not pay zakat because they live month by month. They live month by month by choice or by necessity, right? Because what they do is the more money they make, the more money they spend. So, for example, hey, a husband and wife are both working. We're going to have 2 weeks off in the summer. We'll spend $20,000 on a trip, right? So they basically blow their savings, right? Every year they blow their savings, right? So in which case there's no zakat is going to be due. Every year they decided to send their kids to an expensive school, right? So they make good money, but because they make good money, they decided to send their kids to an expensive school. So then they don't have any savings, right? So many people like that. Or this person, I don't know whatever they do with it, right? So as long as you do not keep that cash for a whole lunar year, no zakat is due. That's the point. Okie dokie. And so it says the amount to be paid on money and trade goods is 2.5%. So you have savings of $40,000, you give $1,000 away. On crops and fruits, meaning dates and grapes, grown by irrigation, 5% is due. So if you have to pay for the water, then you give only 1/20th. But if the land is not irrigated, mashallah, like in Malaysia here, you're in some place where it's always raining and you have paddy fields and you don't do any work for it, there's no irrigation needed, then 1/10 of the crops. So you give the crops, you don't give the money, right? So when you say zakat on cows, you mean you're giving a cow away. You're not giving money away. You say zakat on sheep, you mean you're giving a sheep away, right? Zakat on dates, you're giving dates away. Zakat on crops, you're giving crops away. So you're giving crops to the poor. And then we have zakat al-fitr. So zakat al-fitr has to be paid by every Muslim who possesses more than his actual needs. So again, many people don't actually have to pay zakat al-fitr, right? Because this person, if you look at his needs, he has debts, even long-term debts, right? This person, for example, they need for the day of Eid, they need A, B, and C. They don't make that. Many people make less than what they need, right? So they pay zakat anyway. So, but they're not obliged to, right? So it's fine to pay zakat if you're not obliged to, but it's not fine to pay zakat when that's not what you're supposed to do. So let's say, for example, Eid's coming, right? Eid al-Adha is coming. Similar kind of discussion. Should I slaughter a sheep or not? Right. So here in Malaysia, it's actually quite expensive. It's like for sheep is like um it's like about $400. Yeah, almost about $350 here. It's quite expensive. If you think about it. Like this, that's almost like a month's salary. It's like two-thirds of a month's salary. So um, it's quite expensive here. So here's this person who goes out of their way, borrows money to slaughter a sheep on Eid, even though it's not they're not obliged to, right? And there are other things that Allah wants them to focus on, right? That they don't do. So, for example, many people give charity, right? You go to the masjid, all these people give charity. And this person has a interest-bearing loan. So, what's more important, to pay $5 in charity or to pay $5 to reduce your interest-bearing loan and to get out of the haram? What's more important?
Paying the loan.
Hmm? So the thing, people feel bad, they feel emotional, right? So they're in the masjid, they're there on Friday, and the masjid says, "Look, we need help." Or the masjid says, "Oh, I'm from this organization, it's an orphanage in Kenya," right? And they feel bad, right? And they feel like, "Oh, I should give charity." Like in their mind, charity is good, I feel bad. And they think about all these hadith about charity, but they don't understand that there's a priority. So we shouldn't think emotionally, right? We got to think like, what does Allah actually want me to do, right? Like, what does Allah actually want me to do? Right? And so we have to understand the Sharia is like Allah's language of love, right? Like the Sharia is like Allah's language of love. So it's like you married to somebody and you show love to them in the wrong way, you know? For example, um, husband and wife have an argument and the wife really, really, really doesn't like um things being disorganized. Like for her, it's really, really important that certain things be organized. And she's a bit OCD about it, but that's how she is. Okay. And so the guy's like, "Oh, we had an argument. I'm going to make up by buying her flowers." It's like, Habibi, don't go and buy me flowers. Just do what I asked you to do. Like your toolkits, whatever, like you're fixing your car and just like leave stuff everywhere. Like, please don't do that. Like, please don't leave stuff like that around because it really freaks me out. Right. So that's called a language of love, right? Like the thing that I particularly want from you, please do this thing. Don't do something else, right? So the same thing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Sharia, when we're learning fiqh, is you're learning what does Allah actually want me to do, as opposed to what do I think Allah might like me to do, what would be nice, right? So there's certain times where like, wouldn't it be nice to pay zakat al-fitr? Everybody's paying zakat al-fitr. This is so good, right? I feel nice about it. Yeah, but that's great, but it might not be an obligation and it might be something else. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, خير صدقة ما كان على ظهر غنى. The Prophet ﷺ said the best charity is that which is given from a free back, meaning you're not in debt. So by default, when you're in debt, the most important thing to do, particularly if it's a sinful debt, may Allah protect us, the most important thing to do is pay off that debt. So why are you paying something extra when Allah wants you to pay somewhere else, right? Or like men, for example, who help the community at the cost of their own family, right? It's like you're doing good, but at the cost of something that Allah wants you to do, right? Or women who do a similar thing. Men and women both do it, right? There's often more gratification in doing things outside of the home, than doing things inside the home. So there's more of a buzz. It feels good, right? But that's not necessarily what Allah wants you to do, right? Okay, so zakat al-fitr. So assuming I don't have debts, I'm making enough money, then what do I need to do is I pay zakat for myself and every single person I'm obliged to support. So myself, my wife, my kids, etc. If you have to support your parents, then you pay zakat for them. Its amount is 4 mud, okay, is 4 mud, which is a sa'. So 2.03 liters of grain, right? So you say in Malaysia, for example, I'm in Malaysia, the people eat rice. In England, the main staple is wheat. In some places, the main staple is something else, right? So you look, what's the main staple? And you're going to give uncooked, an uncooked scoop, right? 4 scoops of grain to the poor so that they can store it, eat it, or sell it. They can do whatever they want with it, but we give grain, right? So given on the day of Eid or during the night preceding it. Niyyah is required for all of those on whose behalf is being paid. You have to intend, right, when you're doing this thing. It is not permitted to give zakat al-fitr except to a Muslim who is characterized by one of the 8 categories. So zakat or zakat al-fitr, right? There's 8 groups of people listed in the Quran. You have to give to one of those 8, such as being poor or a destitute person, and is not Hashimi or Muttalibi. So they cannot be from Ahl Bayt. They cannot be descendants of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it is necessary to find out if they are from these groups. You can't just so with charity you can just, Mustafa saying, "Oh, I'm raising money for an orphanage in Pakistan." It's like, "Oh, here we go." You can just give without asking. Whereas zakat is you're giving somebody's money to somebody, right? So you know that you had to send $200 to somebody in Russia. You can't pronounce her name. You have an address, you have an ID, you have this, you have that. You don't even know how to pronounce her name. You've never seen her. You're going to be very, very careful to make sure that it actually goes to her, right? How am I going to get these $200 to this person, right? You can't just say, "Oh, it's okay, I gave it to somebody in St. Petersburg, so presumably we'll get to her." You can't do that. Zakat is somebody's money. So you have to be very careful to make sure it gets to that money. And if you're not sure, don't give it, right? You have to be nitpicky because it's someone else's right. Whereas sadaqah is not someone else's right? So it's not a problem. Okay. Hajj and Umrah. Hajj is the fifth of the pillars of Islam, and as we mentioned, every pillar is either turning away from the dunya, turning away from other than Allah, or turning to Allah. And Hajj is doing both, right? You spend money and time away from the dunya. You give up on things, right? Let's say, for example, you have 2 houses, right? You really like both of the houses, okay? And then you're like, hang on a minute, I don't actually need my second house. Like I own my house and I own a second house, but my income is it's quite insignificant, but I own 2 houses. So we're going to say, hey, you're actually going to have to sell your second house to go on Hajj, right? You have to sell your um, um, you sell your second house to go on Hajj. So like you're giving up on things, right? You have to spend money, right? From the US, it's about 15K, is that right? Mustafa? Uh, to go on Hajj, it costs
Yeah, around 10.
10, right? So that's a lot of money, right? It's a lot of money to spend. So you're gonna physically leave your home, physically leave your work, physically leave things, spend lots of money, time, energy, right? It's a huge thing. You're giving up on the dunya in order to go on Hajj. You're also turning to Allah by saying words like Labbaik Allahumma labbaik, the adhkar. You're turning your heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're saying words, doing actions. You're going round and around the Kaaba, right? This is your life is going round around the Kaaba, right? Of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So Hajj is the 5th of the pillars of Islam. It is a fard obligation on every Muslim who is mukallaf. So when we say Hajj, we mean Hajj and Umrah. So in the Shafi school, both are obligatory. So many people are never obliged to go on Hajj. They don't have the means to go on Hajj. right? Umrah is like $2,000, right? Is that correct, Hassan? Mustafa? $3,000, right?
Yeah.
Right. So
No.
there's many people
Mhm.
at a certain time in life, for example, they just graduated, they started working, they got their first paycheck, right? And they're living with their parents still, for example. The mum's dad just saying, save up some money. Just save up some money before you start moving out, whatever. So they're in a situation where they had, yeah, I had, you have that kind of money. So that means you're obliged to go on Umrah. And that's registered now in your responsibility. So going on Umrah is much more doable, right? And much more likely that you're going to be obliged to do that than Hajj. So Hajj is the fifth of the pillars of Islam. It is a fard obligation on every Muslim who is mukallaf. You're more responsible. As is Umrah, once in one's life, on the condition that one has the ability to go. You have the physical ability, you have the financial ability. That means that one possesses what is needed to travel, to look after the people you're responsible for. So when you leave, what are you going to leave with your wife? What are you going to leave with your kids? Is the rent going to be paid? For the pilgrimage to come back, is it safe? Right, etc. A condition also for a woman, she has the permission of her husband. Right. So a woman doesn't need the permission of her father. Right. You don't need permission. Your father says no, you can't go on Hajj. Right. You don't need the permission of your father for a woman. You don't need permission of your brother. My brother says, I don't give you permission. You don't need your right. But you do need, because they are your protectors. They don't have rights over you in that sense. Right. They are protectors of you. Whereas your husband has immediate rights over you, right? Immediate conjugal rights over you as a woman, right? So his rights are immediate, whereas Hajj is at some time in your life. And so if he says, no, I don't want you to go, then you're not obliged to go. You're not allowed to go. You're not obliged to go. Right? However, it's sunnah, obviously, to take one's wife on Hajj or Umrah, right? Um, okay. Similarly, when we say, when we say ability for a woman, that means, so what if a woman, so does that mean a woman has to go even without her husband? So the husband says, I allow you to go, right? But I can't come with you because I got to work. So then how does that work? So we say she then goes with a group of women, or a Hajj group that has men and women in it, right? So that means here's this woman, she has her own savings, okay? So we said you're in the States, for example, and she has 15K in savings. Hajj comes along, she asks her husband, can I go on Hajj? Says, yeah, will you come with me? And he says, I can't. I don't have the means, and I need to work. So now she is obliged to go on Hajj, because there's always Hajj groups, and there's always going to be a group of women there, right? So she's not going to be alone. It's not just her traveling by herself, right? That's in terms of obligation. In terms of permissibility, she would not be obliged to go on Hajj, but as long as she is safe, then she could even travel by herself. So she went on her own private jet. She flew from Alaska in her own private jet. Nobody on the airplane besides her. She flies over over Canada, over Greenland, over Europe, and lands somewhere to fuel up in Eastern Europe, and she's safe. As long as she's safe, it's permissible, right? So a woman can travel by herself for an obligation as long as she's safe, right? But a woman cannot travel for a non-obligation without a mahram. So she can't leave her city without a mahram in the Shafi school. She can't she can't do that without a mahram in the Shafi school. So, but otherwise, for any obligation, for example, she has to support herself. She has to go and do surgery. She has to go and seek sacred knowledge. She has to perform Hajj or Umrah, something like that. Then she would be obliged. She would be allowed to travel, uh, as long as she's safe, right? But here we're not talking about allowed, we're talking about obliged. So here was this lady. There was no reason. The only reason why she didn't go on Hajj is because she said, I want to go with my husband. It feels weird. I don't want to travel by myself. But she had a group of sisters to travel with. She was going to be safe. A group of sisters to travel with in a Hajj group. She had the financial means, right? And so therefore she's obliged to go. Right. And it's important to understand as well is that women in the Shafi school are not obliged to look after children. She says, yeah, but my kids, like, one of them's 10, the other one's 12, like I feed them, take them to school. That's all sadaqah. You're not obliged to do that. So because you're not obliged to do that, and because you are obliged to go on Hajj, that means there's a conflict, right? Right, there's a conflict. Like my daughter the other day, she said, "When's Mama coming back?" I was like, "I don't know, but what do you need Mama for?" She's like, "Mama always solves everything, right? Mama always solves everything." So my daughter's like, "There's food in the kitchen. I can make it for you if you like. You can make it. It's not a big bit, but she just wants her mum, you know?" So many women would be like that. It's like, my daughter's young, my son's young. I just feel like I can't go leave them. So yeah, that's true. You feel like you can't leave them, but you can leave them, right? In reality, as long as they're safe, as long as they're, you know. So just because something's awkward doesn't make it haram, right? Obviously, if something's dangerous, you know, I'm needed to look after an individual because they actually may be harmed, right? My mother has mental problems, and I actually need to stop her from throwing herself off a cliff every two minutes. Then okay, the baby is very young and it's actually dangerous and whatever it is, it's something else. But the point is, you have an obligation which is Hajj and Umrah. That is a more of an important thing. As long as your husband says, he overlooks his rights, the children do not have a right over her, right? The children do not have a right over her. The only right of the children over the mother is to give birth to them and to give and do the first milk. That's it. The first, what's it called? Hind milk, whatever it's called. Not hind milk. The colostrum, right? That's the only obligation. After that, she's not obliged to breastfeed. She's not obliged to change. Not obliged to anything. That's not her obligation. That's not an obligation towards her children, nor is it an obligation towards her husband in the Shafi school, right? So that's important to understand. The acts of Hajj are of three types: essentials, arkan, duties, wajibat, and sunnahs. The arkan of Hajj are five: to enter ihram. This is the intention to enter pilgrim sanctity for Hajj and Umrah. It is preferred that one utters the words, "I intend to perform Hajj or Umrah, and I sanctify myself. I put myself into ihram in a sacred state, thereby with God the Exalted." It is not valid to enter ihram for Hajj except in the Hajj months. So Hajj has specific times of the year. Umrah has any time of the year, which are Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, which we're in right now, and the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, meaning the first 9 days. The last of which is the dawn of the sacrifice of Dhul Hijjah. So if you don't enter ihram before Fajr on Eid al-Adha, then you cannot enter ihram for Hajj and you've missed it. The remaining arkan are to stand, meaning to physically be there, even if you're not awake, at Arafah, to do the tawaf on the Eid, and to do your sa'i, going between Safa and Marwa on the Eid. And then you cut or shave your hair. That's the integrals, that's your bare minimum. The arkan of Umrah are the same as the arkan of Hajj, with the exception of standing at Arafah. So what you do at any time of the year, you enter pilgrim sanctity, you go to Mecca, you go around the Kaaba 7 times, you go between Safa and Marwa, and you cut your hair. That is called Umrah, right? Then it says Tawaf and Sa'i. Necessary for Tawaf are covering one's awrah. So Tawaf is like prayer, right? So how do you face the Qibla in Tawaf is by having your shoulder not perpendicular, in a line. You draw a line from your right shoulder to your left shoulder, and it's always facing the Kaaba, right? That's how you face the Qibla. Your awrah is covered, right? You are pure, state of tahara, from things which invalidate it, and from najasa. You don't have filth on you. You have wudu. That the tawaf is 7 times inside the prayer area and keeping the house to one's left. So you're not outside of the masjid. You're not just in Mecca, right? You can't just do tawaf in Mecca. You have to do tawaf in the masjid, right? Around the Kaaba itself. And you keep the Kaaba to your left, meaning again, you draw a line from your right shoulder to your left shoulder and you'd hit the Kaaba. That one is not actually inside the Kaaba. So that doesn't really apply anymore. Well, it kind of does. The Kaaba is, the foundation of the Kaaba are bigger than the walls of the Kaaba. So if you look at the bottom of the Kaaba, there's a slope. Okay? So that slope, as it goes up, so if you touch the walls of the Kaaba, your hand is actually inside the Kaaba. Because the walls are actually, the base is actually wider. So if you went around the Kaaba with your hand on the Kaaba, as you're walking around, your hand is touching the Kaaba. That would mean a part of you is not going around the Kaaba, is going in the Kaaba. So that doesn't count. So you touch the black stone, you touch the Kaaba, that's true, but you don't move while you're touching these things. Because that would mean that when you're going, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالطَّوَّفُوا بِالْبَيْتِ الْعَتِيقِ, and then go around the sacred house or the ancient house, not go inside the house, right? So you can't have your hand or body inside that. People used to walk along this ledge. The ledge doesn't exist anymore. But, so they used to actually walk along this ledge, and that ledge is actually inside the Kaaba. So that means they're actually doing tawaf inside the Kaaba, not around the Kaaba. The sa'i must be done 7 times. It's going between Safa and Marwa, and you just go back. You don't need to have wudu to do that. Number 2, the obligations. So these are the bare essentials, the obligations of Hajj. The wajibat of Hajj are, number 1, being in state of ihram, which is an essential, but doing it from the miqat. So there's this imaginary line around the Kaaba, right? From depending which geographical place you're coming from. So if you're coming from the east, there's a line. You're coming from the west, there's a line. Coming from the south, etc. So there's this imaginary line which is near today, for example, for us coming from America or that kind of direction. It's going to be next to Jeddah. If you're coming from the south, it's next to Yemen. It's in the north of Yemen. If it's coming from the east, it's in Iraq, right? Coming from the north, it's next to Medina. So there's this kind of imaginary line. You have to enter pilgrim sanctity before you cross that line, right? That's an obligation, but it's not essential. Like, if you didn't do it, you can still perform Hajj, but you're sinful, right? Spending the night before the day of slaughter at Muzdalifah. So Muzdalifah, this is after Arafah, and before Eid al-Adha, you're going to spend the night at this place. You need to spend the night there. That's an obligation. Spending the 2 nights of Tashriq at Mina. So after you stone, after Eid, you're going to go and spend the night in Mina, and the next day you're going to stone, and you're going to spend the night in Mina, and the next day you're going to stone, etc. So spending these 2 nights at Mina, or 2 or 3, depending on the conditions there, you're going to have to spend the night there. Throwing stones against the pillar, as you would do on Eid itself, and the 3 days following Eid. And this applies to anybody, right? This is anybody, even if you're not doing Hajj or Umrah. If you ever leave Mecca, you have to do a goodbye tawaf, a valedictory tawaf, right? You can't leave Mecca without going around the Kaaba 7 times as a goodbye tawaf. And it goes over the sunnahs, inshallah ta'ala. Next week and the week after, inshallah, we'll go over the sunnahs of Hajj, and then we'll go on to the next chapter, inshallah ta'ala. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.